And with that, it is officially 11:01, and I will call this City of Lacey Transportation meeting to order on this Tuesday, December 7th of 2021. It appears as though we have an agenda.
I'd make a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Second.
It is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, then we have an agenda, and it looks like we will be first hearing from Aubrey Collier with our State of the Streets report.
We should probably call for a vote, though, Malcolm.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. What are we voting on, Mike?
The agenda. Yeah. We made a motion. We just haven't voted on it yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor, say aye.
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 And now we just got it.
Any opposed? There is no opposition. That is awesome. Aubrey, you have a report for us?
Yes, actually, Brian from my department is going to be giving the presentation to you. I'm just here for backup if you have any questions.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so let me share my screen here. All right, do we see a title page?
Yes.
Excellent. Away. Okay, so what my colleagues here at the city and myself have prepared for the council today is the 2021 State of the Streets report. So let's get into it. Leading off, we'll go with our current pavement conditions, and our average PCI score for the network this year is 83.3. That represents a 0.6 gain. And PCI stands for Pavement Condition Index. It's essentially a score given to each street from 0 to 100. It's a proactive rating technique versus a method such as IRI, which is more of a reactive technique where the stresses show up and then they run the machine over it and it does an inches per mile type of reading. Versus this, where I go out and then I rate every single street every year and get out there and monitor cracking, alligator cracking, patching, rutting, weathering, block cracking for the street, and then punch it into an algorithm that spits out a score between 0 and 100 for each road. And not all roads are created equal because it is a area-based measurement. So if a road section had, say, 100,000 square feet versus a road of 10,000 square feet, the one that's 100,000 square feet would have 10 times the impact on the PCI. Our network consists of 178.6 centerline miles, which is a gain of 10.3 from last year. So we saw a significant gain in network mileage, and that is 412.6 lane miles of roadway. Over on the chart, shows a breakdown of the conditions of the roadways in our network. And very good and good represent 97.2% of all streets in the city, which is up 1% from last year. And then that means obviously the 2.8% fair and poor condition are down 1.8 from last year. This graph shows a 10-year running trend of PCIs dating all the way back to 2012. Shows the council the yearly running trend of our PCI, and effectively we've been hovering around 83 for the past 10 years. Here's a network PCI map, just a all-in-one map showing the condition of every road in the city. It's located after page 33 in the report if you'd like to see a bigger version of it. Actually, I might be able to zoom in here. There we go. And then you can see the dark blues represent roads in very good condition, light blue, good condition, yellows, fair, and red are poor. And with our network being an 83.3, there's a significant amount of blue and dark blue.
That map also is a good reference for citizens who think parts of Lacey are parts of Lacey and they're not. They're UGA or county. So
Yep,
I like
absolutely.
the map a lot.
Going into our new road history, as the council knows, as I said earlier, we added 10.3 centerline miles, so it was a significant gain. You'll notice some of them that were added were completed in 2020 on this map, such as Gateway and Summerwalk. It was just, it's when the road is completed, not when it's presented. So it unfortunately didn't reach last year's presentation, but it'll go into our pavement management network as the pavement being 2020, just to get a better age range rather than fake it a year, which won't matter too much, but just from a tabulation standpoint, it's easier to put it in as such. For the new roads, Gateway is the neighborhood north of the Cabela's. You see it in orange there. Summerwalk, I believe that's Division 5 of Summerwalk. It's down off Parkside, south of Rainier Vista. Campus Ridge, there were 2 roads, Jaden and Cameron, that were upgraded to city standards and added to our network up here. 57th place was in our slurry area. And I noticed that we have a 57th place sign, but it was never accounted for in our network and was considered 57th Ave for a number of years. So I broke that off from that. The council can see my cursor, correct? Or is it not showing up? Okay, good.
Yeah, we fine. Hey, also that map, there's a lot of green on there, so it's a good reference too to show citizens how much parkland we have.
It is.
And then for annexations, we had 3 major annexations. Ordinance 1580, which is Serenity Carpenter, added a little bit to Carpenter. 1589, Marvin Stelicum, a very large addition down by the rack. 4 neighborhoods annexed there, as well as some arterial street. 1596, which is Cap City and Chambers Estates down in the south, which added a little bit of arterial and 3 residential streets. And as I said before, 10.3 centerline miles in total were added to our network this year, which represented a 6.1% gain. Here's some imagery of the annexations in greater detail. The Marvin Road, Steilacoom Road, we added a significant amount of arterial street in Steilacoom and Marvin, as well as 4 neighborhoods. You have Bicentennial, Hawks Ridge, Hawks Glen, and Hidden Forest. Cap City Chambers Estates annexation, the Cap City roads they remain private, but the Chambers Estates streets are part of our network now. There were 3 residential roads, as well as the abutting Rainier Road section. And Serenity Carpenter, we annexed a little portion of Carpenter Road, which I essentially added to this Carpenter Road section because it was built at the same time. It just made sense to slap it on there and instead of generating a new section. With all the additions, council's probably wondering what were the impacts of all the new streets. We annexed a variety of roads from fair to perfectly new. So in the annexation, it was a mix of a lot of different types of streets. Some of the residential roads were chip seal. Steilacoom had a lot of utility cuts in it, and we put in the fire station on the south side of it, scabbed on a lane. So it's a relatively piecemeal road, which might need some TLC in the near future. The thing with the chip seal is the chip seal looks good, which is great, but I unfortunately don't know what is underneath the chip seal, what they covered up. So that could be concerning for the future. But what this chart shows is the impact of the annexation and the new additions, and I split it off into 2. The impact of the annexation on the network, if just the annexation were added, it came in at 76.9, excuse me, PCI and 21.7 remaining service life. And if that were just added to the network alone, it would attribute to a 0.2 drop of network PCI, which was buoyed by the new additions, which were effectively new streets except for Campus Ridge, which were, I mean, they're new and in great condition. They qualify as very good. And 57th Place, which was recently slurried this year with our slurry program, which I'll get into later. But those average out to a 99.3 PCI with a 31.6 remaining service life and would attribute to a 0.3 network gain. So with all the new additions to our network alone, without any rehab, it would have attributed to a 0.1 network increase. But as the council may know, we spend the TBD dollars every year, as well as other funding streams to rehab our streets and try to maintain good roads, because as we know, it is cheaper to maintain a good street rather than let it go bad and rebuild it. You essentially save about 3 to 4 times the cost if you do preventative maintenance and keep up on maintaining your streets. So this map is a pretty cool piece of history for the city because it shows everything that was done since inception. There's projects on here that date back to the 60s. But the big ones I'll be touching on today are the things that we touched or we maintained this year. So that would be the 2021 overlay project, which was a section of Willamette between Marvin and Hogan Bay, a section of Marvin Road just north of where they stopped the DDI improvements between the Main Street roundabout and Willamette roundabout, and a section of Orion Drive where we stopped last year's program at the Home Depot, old Home Depot driveway north to Willamette. The Carpenter Road overlay, which went from where the county stopped their Mullen roundabout all the way up to and a little bit beyond 26th Court at the north end. And with that, there was a portion of 45th Avenue that we owned that, since we were touching Carpenter, we were getting a good price on the asphalt. So we figured to do that along with this project. And the very large slurry seal program that we had this year down in the south, we slurry sealed a number of neighborhoods. Starting with the 2021 overlay, it encompassed 2.9 lane miles. We put down 6 inches of fiber reinforced HMA, which was 8,250 tons of mat. We did a striping refresh and new pavement markings. And tied to this project was the manhole and valve patch repair program, which is a continued effort between my group and the shop, where they'll point out valve and manhole patches that are failing throughout the city. And then with our overlay program or some other program, we'll tie it to and we'll get those fixed. Some before and after photos of the 2021 overlay. This is Marvin Road. As you can see before, there was some wheel path cracking, a lot of it actually. In the inside lane, it was top-down cracking, but in the outside lane, it was bottom-up cracking, which essentially shows that your roadway is beginning to fail and water is intruding through, which our shop picked up on, and we did patches over a lot of the failing sections. And the striping was fading, and all your symbology was fading as well. And then in the after photo, we added the double yellow center line, refreshed the striping, and you can just see the condition difference between the old and the new. Willamette was more of the same, except that portion of Willamette was in worse shape than Marvin. It had a significant amount of mastic, a lot of crack seal, a lot of cracks that weren't even covered by crack seal. There was almost more tar out there than road. So this really needed to go with this project. And as you can tell by the before and after, just the condition change.
I have a question. Crack steel. What is that? What is that material? What is that compound? Is it standard?
Yeah, it's kind of like an engineered tar, where it's meant to be sticky but not. So effectively, you put it in there and it actually expands and contracts with the weather. So when it's hot out, it'll expand, and when it's cold out, it'll contract. So a lot of times you'll see them out there slathering it on there nice and thick, just so when it contracts, it still covers what it's supposed to cover.
Just a quick, I only ask this because I'm concerned about motorcycles. I know that stuff gets a little slick when it's wet, which is 9 months out of the year here. I guess, I don't know. I was going to say, is there any way we can make it so that it's not so slippery when it's wet? But like on Marvin Road, when you go by that school, heading out towards Mullen Road, there's that school there, right? And there's a lot of this stuff on that part of the road, on that part of Marvin there. And when it's wet, it's a little slippery, and I get concerned because there's a lot of kids. Anyway, it was just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see large patches of mastic like this, it's actually meant to be slightly coarse. So it does have slide friction resistance, but it's not advised to put it in turning areas such as roundabouts. You won't see us crack seal a roundabout or put mastic in a roundabout just to dodge the effect of that with a motorcyclist. And cars even can slip as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
they have 2 more points of contact, and it's a little tougher. But I do realize you're technically not supposed to glop on crack seal in like a foot thickness. It's not the ideal use case for it. It's just meant to be a spot sealing of the crack. And if a crack gets to a certain point, then technically crack seal isn't the right approach for it anyway.
Gotcha. I was just wondering because I know that I've watched people slip. I've slipped a little bit, and I'm out there by that school, and I see a lot of this, and I'm like, I didn't know what the composition of it was, and so I'm just thinking to myself, is there, can we? I don't know what to think. Like in my mind, I'm like, maybe we can add some sand to it or something. I don't know, to make it stickier or something, because I don't know. It was right next to a school, and I was like, if somebody were to lose control.
I guess the short answer is it's designed not to be fully slippery. It's meant to have some slight friction resistance to it.
Gotcha.
But obviously it's not the same as the coarseness of an HMA mat. And you'll only get that with a wheel path dig out, or putting down new asphalt, or putting a preventative maintenance surface technique on it. So.
Roger that. I'm sorry. Continue on. I just had that question.
Continuing, we did Orion as well. Here's some pictures of that before and after. You can tell this had a large amount of wheel path cracking, wheel path alligatoring. A lot of the outside lane had bottom up cracking, and it was failing. And just looking at the color difference, you can tell there was a lot of moisture intrusion and oxidation of the surface. So we were potentially at the point of getting some aggregate loss in certain spots on that road. Next project in our 2021 improvements was the Carpenter overlay. It was 3.7 lane miles, 2.39 light in the city, 1.31 light in the county. We did a utility project in the area that went into the county. So,
Hey, Brian,
yes.
what's the rating of that? Because I just drive that all the time, and it looked bad.
Which part? The south part?
Well, probably kind of closer to the S curve, up by the bus barn and where the overhead door is. Yeah, right up in there.
Oh, the bus barn would be further north. That's the other curve. That's the one.
Oh,
where-
yeah, okay.
This
Yeah,
is the one
okay.
further south.
Yep, I got it. Yeah, right by the fairgrounds.
Yeah,
Yep, I got it. Yeah, right by the fairgrounds.
yeah, yes, sir.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, the condition of the southern section before we redid it was low to mid 30s. And then the northern section by the school in Long Lake Park, I believe that was 70s.
Do you know offhand how that improved our overall rating? I mean, because 30s are pretty bad. It's like a complete fail at that point.
Absolutely. When we redo a road, it goes up to 100. Unless there's some construction error, it should be a perfectly new street. So those 30s turned into 100s.
Yeah, but the overall rating, is that why it got up in the mid
Oh,
80s?
you're talking about the overall network rating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of it, because if the council thinks about it, when you're bringing a road up from 30 to 100, that's about a 70 PCI gain. And then you think every other street drops maybe 1 to 2 points a year. This year we had a pretty mild winter, so a lot of our roads actually stayed the same. So for every road that dropped 1 point, each one of these sections essentially covered 70 of them. And this wasn't the only section that got redone this year. So we did 10 new sections, I believe. So if there's an assumption of, say, 50 points of PCI gain on 10 sections, that's 500 points of PCI. So it offsets about 500 other streets, plus the new stuff we brought in that buoyed the network and raised it. So it's a multitude of factors between how our current network degrades and the work that we do. And the numbers that Street Saver spits out aren't perfect, because it'll ignore bad roads a lot of times because it assumes there isn't funding for it unless you tell it there's funding for it. So in their calculations, go ahead.
Hey, Brian, but in the short term, it's great, but in the long term, it adds that much more liability because the funding doesn't really change. Thank God for the transportation benefit district, but these are just added liabilities 30 years down the road that we need to pay, start saving up for to be able to fix and repair.
It's more good than bad, I'd say, to bring a road up from 30 to 100, because when it gets that bad, it's a safety issue. You get a lot of potholes at that point, sections of missing roadway, where at that point you could have somebody dropping a tire and losing a tie rod or sliding off the street. So when we redo a road like this, it's a safety concern, and we're fixing that.
To me, it's a long-term budget concern because it's the same amount of money going in, but more to take care of. So these,
And I mean, you're not wrong, because every point of PCI we gain, obviously, I'll go over later our budget scenarios, but I always run one where it's to maintain our current PCI. So to maintain that current PCI for every 1 point bump, you're 100% correct. It will cost more and more dollars. So there's a give and take where we could set a target of what PCI we want to shoot for every year, which, judging by the trend line, 83 is kind of the funding avenue that we've been shooting for, and it's what we've been hitting for the last 10 years. And that's not to say funding will dry up or whatnot in the future, but with what we've been doing so far and the funding we've had, we've been able to maintain that 83 as of this date. But I mean, with the addition of new network, if we add more network, if our network size doubles in the near future, then maybe we'll come into a lot more issues than we're dealing with now. But time will tell.
But like these sections of road where they're 30%, cost 3 times as much to repair and reconstruct than it does, fixing a 60% rating.
Correct.
So,
But
if we maintain it properly, then it costs 2 times less than to take care of it.
Absolutely. And that's the goal with a road like Carpenter in the future, where we don't let it get to 30 again, where we'll come in and we'll do just a simple grind and overlay of it instead of having to do a full reconstruct. And instead of putting back 6 inches of fiber mat, we'll put back 2.5 inches of fiber mat, and we'll save effectively 3 to 4 times the cost just on doing that alone and keeping up on routine maintenance.
There was also some sewer in this project.
That would have been the utility part of it. But yes, we did do sewer as well as water in the area. And that was part of the reason why we went into the county with our overlay here. And obviously they reimburse us for work done in their limits.
Nice.
Essentially, this project was the same as the 2021 overlay, where we put down 6 inches of fiber reinforced mat, came out to 11,100 tons, refreshed the striping and pavement markings on the job, generally made it a lot safer through fair to use. And if I go into the pictures here, Carpenter obviously was in much worse condition than Marvin and Willamette, where you can see we were starting to get pavement loss and the outer lane was sloughing off, into the ditch in spots, a lot of mastic, road heavily oxidized. You can tell water was intruding into the base and making it soft in spots. We were starting to slump and get a little bit of wheel path rutting. And then just the comparison between the before and after. I mean, it's night and day on that road.
Yeah, the improvements are really awesome. And you know, there's a lot of residential that's pretty close to that road. So I'm sure they're very happy that it's been redone. I noticed that on the side where the school is at, and if you just start heading north from there, there's a lot of shoulder, and then it kind of tapers down once you get down towards fairgrounds. Is there some plan to widen that, or is there?
It's in the tip, but that's also a very large right-of-way take and a very expensive project that we probably wouldn't be able to fund through our funding streams. And that'd be
Great.
something more for Roger Schessel and Martin Hoppy.
Hey, Brian, the lower right-hand corner picture, you know, with the, you know, not the actual lane, but the, I don't know what
Shoulder?
it was just meant, yeah, the shoulder, there you go.
Mhm.
Shouldn't have that been seal coated, you know, because it's oxidizing and stuff, and it would last longer, right, with the seal coat. I know it's extra money, but I mean, you'd think a project of this magnitude, that would be a minimal cost to, you know, and I know only bikes and people are walking on it, but you know, if that starts to fail, so does the underground on the brand new road, you know, more or less.
And that's a double-edged sword for throwing money at shoulder like that, where it's so low travel, it effectively only sees buses on the south end, and on the north end, people are turning out into the street, and it's not really seeing any traffic loading at that point.
Yeah, and it
So
probably does more into overlay or grinding, especially. But you know, seal coat is pretty cheap. You know, just spray it on and done.
I mean, we could consider it in the future, but it's also a cost issue, and it'd be another machine that they'd have to bring in. So it incur some other complications that could potentially come up, but it's not really standard to do an overlay and then seal coat next to it. So typically if we see a shoulder and it's in decent shape for one of our overlays on our arterial streets or collectors, we'll just saw cut next to it or have them removed next to it and seal the seam, just to save a little bit of money and not have to deal with throwing down new mat in a spot that's going to see what, like 10 buses a day maybe. And
Well, there's obviously parts of the city where the roads need more attention than that shoulder.
absolutely. So the big thing with our overlay programs is pick up the lanes, and then if it's practical and makes sense to pick up the shoulder and it sees a lot of traffic, then we will. But in a case like this, where it's essentially a dead end shoulder, it's just not practical to do anything to it if it's in even average shape, because it shouldn't degrade very quickly. And the final project that we did for 2021 was our slurry seal. We did a type 2 slurry. There's 3 types of slurry. Type 1 is essentially a low traffic. It wears off pretty quickly under loading, used for parking lots. Type 2 is the middle ground. And then type 3 is a really thick coat of slurry, which has a lot of noise to it. Almost sounds like you're living next to a freeway. So it's frowned upon. It's usually used around curves and on heavily traveled streets, which this didn't apply to because we were doing residential. So type 2 was in the right zone for this project.
Hey, Brian,
Yes.
can you overlay on a slurry seal, or does it have to be removed?
You would typically grind before you overlaid. So essentially put down a slurry seal, you'd be grinding it off to overlay anyway. And on residential streets, if you're grinding off the top, odds are you're grinding it off because it's cracked all the way through and you're replacing the whole street. But there is a technique called the thin lay, where they do a thin grind, and I believe it's typically like a 5/8 inch mat over residential streets, which is kind of a newer technique. And we don't personally use it, but I have looked into it.
Hey, so the life expectancy of a regular asphalt road is like 30 years, maybe a couple more, right? What's this type 2 slurry seal? Is that like 20 years?
Slurry seal, it's typically 5 to 7, but
Oh, it's down at, I didn't even read it. Sorry.
no, that's fine. That's fine. But if the council looks at, say, Avonlea or where's the other one, up in Campus Park, those slurries were placed roughly 8 years ago, I want to say, and they're still in pretty good shape. So 5 to 7, I'd probably bump up the top range to 12 on a low traveled residential street. But obviously, if there's a lot more turning movement, since it is a surface coat, it'll wear off quicker. So you'll see little tire runs in heavily traveled intersections and slurry seals more than straightaway sections, just because there's a lot more slide friction there, and then it'll rub off your surface coat. Slurry isn't a new street is the big thing, and that's what we have to tell the citizens, where they think they're getting a new street, but I wouldn't say it's just a slurry seal. Slurry is a very effective technique. It's I wouldn't say a newer technique, but to us it's fairly new because we've only done it a couple times. But it's very effective. It does its job, and it saves you money in the long run, especially on residential streets. Because if you look down at the Y slurry section here, right there, cost effective. We're paying $2.25 a square yard versus $25 a square yard for reconstruction of a residential street. And that $25 a square yard is just for 2-3 inches of asphalt. So if you're talking doing a slurry, or I mean, even like a chip seal to a collector, the reconstruction costs would go up. So your savings would go up. You're buying, 5 to 10 years of lifespan on the roadway for 1/10 of the cost of rebuilding it.
So just to clarify, this is not something we'd use on a road that was in poor condition. You use this on a road that's in fair, good condition to extend the life of that road. So if you've got a road that's already really in poor condition, like Carpenter was, you couldn't put a slurry on it because that cracking would just show right through. So you put this on roads that are in better condition to extend the life of those roads. So maybe you extend the life of it for 5 to 7 years, or maybe up to 10 or 15 years before you then have to go and do the full grind and overlay of that road.
Yeah, Lake Point looks really great since the slurry seal this past summer. With a 5-7 year increase in those roads alone. I think those roads were built in what, 93? Somewhere in that ballpark, 92.
In there, yeah.
Yeah. And they're looking pretty good.
And it's part of the pavement management technique where it's cheaper to maintain good roads. So if you hit a residential street with the slurry seal, as soon as the PCI gets down to, I want to say, mid-low 80s, and then you wait for that slurry seal to start wearing off and failing, and then you hit it with another slurry seal. I mean, if you get 10 years out of each one, that's 20 years of life on a road with a life expectancy of about 35, 40 years. So, I mean, you're putting down a road at a certain cost. You're paying 1/10 the cost of reconstruction twice, and then you're buying essentially half the year of the lifespan of the road on top of what you already had. So it's a very effective technique, especially for residential streets, because it would be very expensive for us to let our residential streets go bad and then have to go in there and redo them because there's just so much quantity. And that $25, it doesn't seem like a large amount, but when you're talking miles and miles of road, I mean, you're talking 3, 4, 5 million to rebuild an entire neighborhood. So we just don't want to do that. So we'd rather spend the money to slurry and preach to people that just trust us. It's effective. It works. It's not a new road. It goes down a little rough, but it smooths out over time with traffic loading.
Right.
The only issue we've seen so far with it is in cul-de-sacs, really, where it just doesn't see the traffic that the through roads get. So the compaction of the slurry isn't perfect and it doesn't settle for a while. But over time, it should eventually settle. But early on, it could look rough and we could potentially get a few complaints about it. And here's a couple pictures of completed slurry. This was roughly, I believe, 2 months after it was placed. So as the council can tell, it's not a new road. You see it goes down a little rough, but it revitalizes it and gives it a new surface, gives it that nice black look of a new street. Plus it goes down.
Are we continuing into 2022 with slurry seal? Is there more to be done coming soon?
Yes, we have plans to make this a recurring program. Here's an overview of our 2021 work. We spent about $3.5 million in project cost. Did about 21.5 lane miles of roadway, put down just over 19,000 tons of fiber reinforced mat. And then we put down just over 150,000 square yards of type 2 slurry. This is a 3-year history of what we've done in the past. So this will show just the general lane mileage and square footage of road that we've done along with the asphalt cost. A big thing to take away here is the continued downward trend of asphalt, which we can't assume will happen every year. So what I do in our budget scenarios is I try to take recent asphalt costs and then I'll add a safety factor, so to speak, to it. So I'll run our decision tree like that, and I'll try to be more conservative because I'd rather be on the safe side of putting a higher cost in our plan work than a lower cost, especially with material shortages these days too. I keep following asphalt oil prices, which generally trend with the cost of asphalt itself. And those are back on the rise to about 2019 values now. So it's not to say that the cost is going to go up to 111 a ton again, but it'll likely be higher than the $85 a ton we got this year. I run 4 budget scenarios every year. Scenario 1 is an unfunded scenario, which shows worst case scenario. If we lose all of our funding, what happens in 10 years? Scenario 2, we do a conservative estimate of $2 million a year, approximate revenue from the TBD fund, and run that. Scenario 3 is to maintain our current PCI, which was the 83.3. So effectively, this will just be the cost to maintain our PCI at its current level. And then scenario 4, which is unconstrained, where it throws money at every road that needs it when it needs it. So obviously, this would be best case scenario for maintaining a perfect road network, but not a likely scenario for what we do personally.
Hey, Brian, now that's what I was getting at earlier, because I remember a $10 million number for this scenario just a year or two ago.
I held off
because of the added
I need to slide
roads,
this
right?
down.
Yeah. So because of the added roads and the annexations, that number's jumped up to 11.2. And what do we fund at now with the TBI, or the Transportation Benefit District? What, 3 or 4 million at the most?
Well, I plan for 2 to be conservative in our scenario, but we spend more like 3-4 million.
Yeah. Which is like a third of what we, to get the perfect rating, or the full meal deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what is it to maintain 80%? Was that the $7 million number?
Yes, that's this scenario 3, the $7 million a year number would be to maintain.
Which is essentially we're funding half of that annually.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So,
Yeah,
and my
so
thing
also-
is, 30. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that, I mean, we have more than just the TBD for funding, and in past years, we've had, several federal grants that have gotten us that have
Yeah.
contributed to that dollar amount that we spend per year for these projects, such as on Hogan Bay and College and 22nd. And so we've had several projects like that over the years that have also helped with these funding scenarios.
And then there's utility projects. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's utility projects too that go into this as well, where they'll do a half street or full street in certain projects. And then if somebody decides to crack seal, obviously that won't go into this presentation, but it'll reflect the roadway with the PCI increase. So it isn't the whole amount of spending we do. Like,
I understand that, Brian. I'm always on the soapbox talking about, one-time money projects and not maintaining them and budgeting for them properly. Wouldn't the proper funding source be closer to like 5 million instead of 3.5, 4, or 5.5 million? Then taking into consideration future grants and other stuff, utility projects, and just that, I hate to say conservative, being fiscally conservative, or better, probably fiscally responsible with these one-time money funded projects.
And that's where we come in with our pavement management program. We're trying to do a better job with the funding, where if we don't get that whole meal deal, we have to figure out what streets need to get done and what are our high value targets. So with doing stuff like slurry and possibly getting on mill and fills on roads before it needs a full reconstruct, you can shave a few dollars off that $7 million just by being smart about what roads you choose and when you choose to do it. And that's the goal.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I got into, public policy and leadership positions like council members, because you watch for 40 years and not taking care of infrastructure, transportation wise, I-5, as compared to college, we do a lot better, stuff like that. And it's just being responsible with the taxpayers' money, the ratepayers. And they can pay 3 times as much if it's not managed correctly. If it is managed, if it's not managed correctly, or a third of it if it is managed correctly. So I don't know, it's one of my pet peeves, and that's why I'm always trying to, tell people it's way harder to fix it after it needs to be fixed for the last 20 years than to fix it when it needs to be fixed.
100%.
I think Scott has something.
Yeah, I just want to do a time check because we do have another item that's left on the agenda.
We do. We need to move on.
All right, I'll move on here. I'll try to be a little quicker. All right, so just going through the scenarios, obviously with an unfunded budget, you're going to incur a lot of deferred maintenance cost. So the city would be putting off $88.7 million of projects over those 10 years, and our PCI score would drop to 65, which is in line with what last year's report said. The 2 million TBD budget, you defer about 77.2 million in project costs, and your PCI in 10 years would drop to a 72. And this kind of is tied to us being bigger, where last year it was 73 and this year was 72. It'd drop a point just on having to maintain slightly more network with a fixed amount of cost. Scenario 3, to maintain, obviously the network would stay at the 83.3. We'd be deferring 29.7 million. It went up 1.2 million from last year, which goes into Councilman Stedman, and it goes into what he said, where we have a bigger network, so it's going to be more expensive to maintain, which is 100% correct. If we wanted to do all the roadway projects whenever we wanted, when we wanted, it would cost us 11.2 million per year over the next 10 years, and our network PCI would be 87. So there's diminishing returns, obviously, for your dollar spent per amount of PCI gained. But with this scenario, obviously there'd be zero deferred maintenance because you're spending money whenever you need to spend money. And that was up $500,000 from last year. Diving into what's planned for the immediate future, our proposed TBD projects are on this map over here. And then it includes Royal Street, the Lakeview neighborhood, Franz Street, Galaxy Drive, Quinault Drive, and the roundabout abutting the freeway exit, Nelson Road, 14th Avenue, 7th Avenue, Golf Club Place, a lot of places around Hunter, Campus Highlands Drive in the northeast, Mullen Road in the south, missing link sections of Marvin Road, as well as Carpenter, the area where Mr. Stedman was talking about earlier by the bus barn. In addition to that, we were going to plan on continuing to do slurry seals in our residential roads, try to do effective treatment of streets that need it rather than letting them go bad, so we can save money at this stage of the game rather than letting them go bad, having to reconstruct them and spending that 3 to 4 times. So we're going to try to stay on slurry seals in the immediate future and keep our residential streets good. And all of this should be done at an estimated cost of about $4.5 million. In conclusion, our streets are in great condition. We do have concern over growing inventory and aging residential streets, but with the implementation of the slurry program, hopefully we can reduce that concern over residential roadways and try to keep slurrying them and keeping them in the 80-90 range, so we don't have to reconstruct them until we go over them with slurry a couple times and buy hopefully an extra 20-30 years on the lifespan of each one. And with the slurry seal, we're doing continued preventative maintenance to reduce the decline in the PCI and reducing the roadways requiring reconstructs. That would conclude my presentation. So if you have any questions, or if we have time for any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, my contact information is on there. You can call my desk phone, my cell phone, send me an email if you need clarification on anything, and I will gladly try to respond.
Great job, bro.
That's awesome, Brian. Thank you for your presentation. I know we're running on short on time. There was a couple of questions I wanted to ask about some future projects like, the college extension and 22nd, I believe it's 22nd in college as well. But I'll just have to table those questions for either another meeting or just reach out to you directly. And it was just kind of like right away and stuff like that. But in the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the Lebanon Street traffic calming update. And it looks like we have Martin with us today. Is Martin gonna be able to join us? Or
Should be
It's
coming through
coming in
now.
right now. Yep.
Okay.
I show him as a participant, so he's
Yeah, this is one of those items that we've been on for a little over a year, I guess, or some. How many times have we visited this item, Martin?
Been a few.
Yeah, it's been a few times. Well, please share any updates with us that you might have.
I am trying. Oh, here it is. Sorry. I'll try to make this quick too, but basically what we've done so far, we mailed out those ballots on October 25th, just 41 parcels. We've only had 13 returns so far, which is about 32% voting. 7 votes yes, 6 votes no. And the percentages are there, 53 and 46, so it's pretty close. Traffic calm policy requires 60% of the votes. We've never really had anything less than about 60% on return votes, so this is unusual. So
what was the percentage of when they approached the city about the traffic issues? I mean, it had to have been 60% of the neighborhood that was.
it was under
you know,
60%.
Okay.
Hey,
There's
Martin.
one more.
Of those percentages, what percentage of that of this demographic is owner occupied?
These were sent only to the owners. I don't know what the percentage is. And here were the votes in green, they're yes, and red, no. It was kind of interesting that the homeowners association at 1812, that's an open space, and the homeowners association voted against it.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. And how much time do we have remaining for the rest of these people to get their vote in? If
I've been kind of waiting patiently. I haven't got anything in over a week.
okay,
What we were thinking is maybe after the New Year's, send out a reminder email for the people that haven't voted.
and so for the non-owner occupied units, we're just sending them directly to whatever it says on the county records for where they actually like to have their mail go.
Right.
All right.
You know, Martin, so one of the friends of mine and their daughter went to school with our kids, Rick Vermill, and he was one of the active residents in approaching the city with this, and he hasn't even voted at 1503. It makes me question, the way we've left it, if it's just good enough and not as big a concern anymore.
I'm not sure. I had about 3 people call me concerning the votes, and all of them voted eventually.
So Martin, is it possible that we can, I really want the people to weigh in, and even if that means, sending them another letter saying, hey, to the people who haven't voted or haven't responded, that, maybe, your life is busy and you missed our communication, but we really need you to weigh in on this issue. We don't want to make a decision without you, if at all possible. I just want to make sure that they are getting reached, touched somehow, at least, even if they just acknowledge, yeah, I saw your letter. No, thank you. I don't want to talk to you. Whatever. I don't care. Just, need some acknowledgement from these people so that we can, do our job.
Sure, and we could send out another letter. That's what I was suggesting. Maybe wait till the early next year. I'll put a letter out and try again.
What were the total votes again, and what were the nays and
We got
yays?
13 out of 41.
Dismal.
And it was like 7-6. So the percent kind of,
It's not enough to make a decision.
yeah. Are we communicating to them that the barriers that are there now are temporary? And if we don't get it, they're going to go away unless people vote by, sufficient
Yes.
margin.
Remember in the letter we sent, we had a picture of what they will look like in a permanent state. And I think I did use the word temporary several times,
Okay.
asking for permanent. Do you want them installed as permanent devices?
This might be a door-to-door deal. Am I going to have to go knock on these people's doors, Martin?
I hope not.
This wouldn't be the first time.
The one thing is interesting is we did get one complaint on Dogwood, which is a street just west of Lebanon, of speeding. Police department told me about that, I think last month.
All right.
So they might be diverting a little bit to Dogwood too.
Hey, Martin, would you mind sharing your slides so that we can communicate this with the rest of the council? Just so that we can give them a snapshot of where we're at. I know that I see it here today, but I can tell you I will forget it unless I have a copy of it, and unless it's posted in the agenda. And
No, I could send it all to all of you.
okay, if you just get it to Nicole, I think she could probably.
Okay, sure.
And Martin, based on the committee's suggestion, I guess if we do a final correspondence, just be very clear that if we don't receive sufficient votes, then we will take down the temporary barriers, just so that everyone knows that that's not going to be a permanent state, even if they're temporary barriers.
Understood.
Okay.
Yeah, because in the back of my mind, Martin, I'm thinking like, they see these barriers and they think it's done. If they haven't read your letter. And I just want to, make sure that that's not, the case. Like, hey, it's not finished just because we put up these barriers and things have slowed down a little bit. You're happy, or you're not even on site and you're less than concerned because your tenants are not complaining about it to you. But this is like Councilmember Cox said, this is temporary. You need to know things are going to go back to whatever if you don't say something.
Okay, sure.
It's just human nature to procrastinate and then think it, probably not read closely and
Yeah.
all that. So,
It seems like every time we've done this, people just absolutely hate them or they love them. And so it's surprising that they're not returning the calls, because the folks that I've been talking to have an opinion one way or another, and they're more than happy to share it.
right. Well, I guess, from my vantage point, as much time and effort as you all have put into this, I would hate for it to just wither on the vine. I think
Yeah.
we need to do what we need to do.
Even going door to door though doesn't mean you're going to get a hold of the owner, and maybe the
No, it
owners
doesn't.
don't want it. So
Yeah, I know.
I don't
That's
know.
unfortunate because
The lack of participation though is, especially, I think there was more participation when we started this process, and that it's dropped off. Would you say that you agree with that, Martin? It's about the same.
I mean, the meetings that we've had with them, I think houses wise, I think, because we had a lot of husband and wives there. I don't think we had 13 parcels that ever came in one time, and
Well, I mean, and I know Rick used to do some stuff with the state legislature or at the Capitol, so he knows process. And for him to not be weighing in on it, that's like, I mean, he was one of the driving forces. He came and spoke at City Hall.
yeah, I remember.
And then for him to drop off the map, it's like, what's going on?
Well, I think we all know that civic engagement is hard, can be difficult to get, and to get people to come to the table and talk their opinion, but in this case, I think if we just double our effort or making another effort to reach out to them and let them understand that we need their opinion, and what we have there is temporary, and we would like to move forward, but we'd like to move forward after we hear their opinion and not before.
Yeah, and be very direct, like Scott Spence said.
Yeah. And so
Or is
that's,
that Pence?
Sure.
I believe that's going to be the recommendation of this committee. And with that, it appears as though we have reached the end of our agenda. Unless anybody has anything for the good of the order, I will call this.
No, it was
meeting
great seeing
adjourned.
you guys. Good job, Martin.
Thanks.
I'm a big fan, buddy.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and your presentations this afternoon. And we will see you all next month.
Great. Hey, Scott, have you got a quick second?
Let me give you a
Okay.
call.
Well, I just, we have a meeting scheduled this afternoon at 3.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna be on the road, but I'll have my, I can either meet by phone or I'll have my iPad with me, but I'll be kind of Zooming. I think I'm gonna be able to use an office at the courthouse.
Okay.
I'm just scheduled